Hey everybody, this is Jim the Tabletop Engineer and welcome to a new video. In this video, I am not going to be playing Frostgrave today, I'm sorry, but I do have something Frostgrave related that I hope you enjoy, or at least some of you will enjoy. I have a friend, James, who has recently started playing Frostgrave with his oldest son who's in high school. They have the book. I'm going to be talking Frostgrave 2nd edition, not 1st edition. So 1st edition rules are close to the 2nd edition, but there are some differences. So James and his son played their game, and I asked him about it, and James just wasn't all that. He was like, I could tell something was up. And he said he really just didn't know what he was doing. He said the game was kind of fun, and they liked rolling the dice and moving the miniatures, but he didn't really know what he was doing, and his son sort of didn't know what he was doing, and they didn't really grasp the concept of the game. Now, they'd read the rule book, but they just didn't seem excited about it. So I told James, I said, you know what, I'll put some thoughts down on paper, and or maybe we can meet and discuss, or you can watch me play a game, whatever. And it got me thinking. So I went home and I couldn't get it out of my mind. So I immediately sat down and I wrote out like 29 bullet points of things that I thought a new player or someone considering playing Frostgrave should know about the game. So in this video, I'm going to go through a whole bunch of those, not all 29. Some of them are more for a more advanced video, which I may do. Let me know if you want me to do that. The advanced video will probably be more specific to certain schools of magic, maybe certain spells, things like that. But this video is about basic strategy discussion for new players or people who just want to understand the game a little better. I don't pretend to know everything. This is more of just a spitting out of things I've learned over 10 years. This game's been out for 10 years, and these are things that I've just sort of picked up along the way. So the first question I want you to ask yourself as a new player, if you don't already know, is what's the point of the game? Well, the easy answer is to have fun. That's the word game is sort of in the title there. But yes, all games, hopefully we're having fun. But if you are going to play Frostgrave competitively against an opponent, and you're going to play long-term, like a campaign or an ongoing series of combat games, what I want you to do is ask yourself, what's the point? What is the end game? Where am I going to? And for me, and I think if you think about it long enough, the real answer is you're going for a more powerful wizard. You want your wizard to increase in power. They will get more powerful spells. They'll grow in their stats, things like that. And your apprentice will grow along with them. As your wizard gains attributes, your apprentice will gain attributes. And as the spell numbers come down for your wizard to cast them, the numbers for your apprentice will come down. So, looking at long term, your goal for playing the game, if you're playing a campaign, is you want a more powerful wizard. Well, how do you get there? How do you get there is XP. You get XP. So really, the purpose of the game, the core goal of the game is the obtaining of XP. Get XP, your wizard gets more powerful. Your apprentice gets more powerful. The games can likely get more fun. They also get more dangerous. So if the goal is to get XP, how do you do that? That should be your goal for the game, obtaining XP. And if you know your goal, all you need to really understand is, how can I get there? How can I get that XP? Well, Frostgrave has a number of ways of doing this. Let's just count them out. The first way you gain XP is by showing up. Believe it or not, the rules of Frostgrave give you, if your wizard, not your apprentice, but if your wizard shows up to a game, you get 40 XP. 40 XP. Now, your wizard gets more powerful by trading XP to do things. There are 3 things you can do with XP. You can increase an attribute. You could take your health from 14 to 15, or your fight from +2 to +3. You can reduce the cost to cast a spell. So if rolling a spell, you need a 12 or lower, a 12 or higher, you could spend XP to lower that to 11 or higher. -1 on the casting roll. And then the third thing you can do with XP is you can learn a new spell. All right. To learn a new spell, you need to have found a grimoire in the game which has a spell. You'll roll randomly for which spell it is. But if you choose to add that spell to your list of 8 known spells when you start the game, you can spend 100 XP and you can do that. And you can do each one of those a maximum of 1 time per game, 1 time per session. So if you think about it, if it costs 100 XP to do each of those, your goal for the game is to get 300 XP every game session, right? Get 300. Then you can spend 100 to up a point on your stats, 1 to lower a spell casting number by 1, and 1 to learn a new spell. Now, there are reasons why you might not care about getting 300. I mentioned that getting a grimoire with a new spell. Well, if you don't have a new spell to learn, you don't have 100 XP to spend. You'll have to wait until you find a grimoire. But 300 should be your goal. And then you will modify that goal based on certain strategies and certain game plans that we'll talk about in this video. You'll adjust that accordingly. So here's a few things about that 300. Anything past 300, you cannot save. If you get 340 XP during a game, the cap is 300. You cannot get more than 300 during a game, and so that 40 would be lost. Now, there are exceptions. There are a spell or two that will give you some bonus XP, and there are some scenarios which will give you bonus XP and it'll state, you can get this, and if you go over 300, that's okay. But otherwise, 300 is the cap. If you earn 340 in a standard game, 40 of it goes away. You can't do it, you lose it. It does not get banked. But that said, if you earn 300 at the end of a game and you only increase a stat and decrease a spell by 1, you've only spent 200 XP. That remaining 100 or whatever you have left, you can bank that and save it for the next game. Because the next game you may only get 115 XP. Well, you spend 100, you bank 15. When you've banked 100, do something. As long as you can only do one of those 3 things per round. All right, so knowing that you cannot bank 300, let's talk about what a perfect game is. A perfect game, okay? Keep in mind, I need to go back a step. You can show up to get XP. Treasure tokens, you can get 40 XP per treasure token. In a standard game, between you and an opponent, there will be 5 treasure tokens on the table. That's 200 XP on the table for the getting, right? 200. Your wizard and your apprentice, each phase or each turn, can cast 1 spell. If it's successful, they get 10 XP. If it fails, they get 5 XP. So you still get XP if you fail a spell. Now there's a thing called empowerment. Let's say the target number of a spell is 12 and you roll an 11. Empowerment says you can take 1 point of health away from your caster and apply it to the casting roll. So you could turn that 11 into a 12 by losing 1 health. Your wizard goes from 14 down to 13, for example. If you miss by 2, you could lower your health by 2 and up that by 2, and it turns a 5 XP failed spell into a 10 XP successful spell. There are limits. You want to be watching that wizard or that apprentice and not getting them too low on health, but that is an option to empower. And then the last way you can get XP, well, there's 2 ways, is killing uncontrolled creatures. You get 5 XP when those show up randomly on the table. Or you sometimes can get bonus XP from a scenario that you play. The scenario might say something like, the first wizard to the top of the tower gets 50 XP, or the first soldier to kill a werewolf gets a bonus 25 XP. That bonus XP is applied to the 300 max, unless it specifically says this XP can allow you to go over 300. If it doesn't say that, it only adds up to the 300, and anything beyond 300 is lost. So knowing that those are the ways that you can gain XP, let's talk about a perfect game. You get 40 for showing up. So now we need 260. Let's say you get all 5 treasures, which is very rare, but it's doable. That's 200. Now you're up to 240 XP. You lack 60 XP. In a perfect game, in my mind, the way to do that would be for 3 rounds, your wizard and your apprentice each cast 2 successful spells. That's 20 plus 20 plus 20 is 60. Add that to the 240, and you've got your 300. Your wizard and your apprentice haul butt. That, to me, would be a perfect game. But there are other ways to get to that 300 XP. That's just probably the shortest, quickest route. Get your show up for 40, get 5 treasures, and cast 6 successful spells for a total of 60 XP, and you have 300 XP, and the game is over for you, at least, unless you want to just keep fighting your opponent. All right, the last thing I want to say about XP is this. Do not rely on bonus XP from a scenario. Just don't. If it's there, great. If you can get it, great. But when I go in to play a game, I don't ever bank on being able to get that bonus XP. I go in for what I know I can get, which is my show up, get XP for any treasure I can get off the map, and then get XP based on my wizard and my apprentice casting spells. All other ways to get XP, like killing uncontrolled creatures, that's a bonus. By the way, in first edition, you could get XP by killing opposition warband members. That is no longer the case in second edition. So think about that as you finish watching this video and you listen to more strategy talk about how to play the game. Keep in mind that you need to set a goal in mind for XP. You want to get as much XP as you can, up to 300, and you want to get off the table safe and secure with your wizard and apprentice alive. All right, let's talk about some other stuff. All right, at the beginning of the game, I mentioned that one of the best things a new player can do in the game to sort of, I won't say level the field, but it can definitely hurt you is if you don't do it. And that is to just become fluent in the game rules. Now, I'm one to talk. I frequently play games against my opponent where I'll forget a rule, they'll forget a rule, and I'll remind them, oh, no, you can't do that, or he'll remind me or whatever. And an example of this, for example, was I remember in one game the player was casting a spell. It was a 2-part spell. By 2-part, what I mean is you first roll the die to see if you cast the spell successfully. If you cast it successfully, then you have to roll the die again to see if it hits the target. Well, I knew what spell he was casting, and he just overlooked it. He rolled the dice. I think he rolled like an 18 or 19. It was a good roll. And he goes, I hit you. And I said, no, you didn't. You just cast it successfully. And he's like, what are you talking about? And I said, it's a 2-part spell. And he's like, oh, he remembered. You know, he's like, he had forgotten that after casting the spell, he still needed to try to hit my soldier. So in that sense, you know, it was a fair, he forgot, and I reminded him. But if I did not know that rule, his 18 or 19 would have hit my thug and taken him down to like maybe one hit health point, and that would have been that. So I give this as an example of, as a novice player, there is nothing wrong with just knowing the rules, because a lot of times when you play games, you tend to forget rules. I do it all the time. My opponents do it all the time. And so knowing the rules could mean the difference between like your wizard going down to 1 health or not. That second roll, I can't remember if he hit or not. I think he did hit. But the second roll, he may have missed, and he cast the spell successfully, which does get him 10 XP. He just didn't hit the target. So knowing the rules is one of those key components that a new player should totally have under their belt. What are some other examples of these know the rules? Well, I've written some down for you, and some of them are probably going to be, you know, pretty common knowledge to most players, but not necessarily to novices. So one of them is this one: you are not required to move into combat. That is the opponent's choice. Let me give you an example. If your opponent has a thug in the middle of the field and there's a treasure next to him, okay, you don't have to go base-to-base combat with him. You could run your thug up the middle as his move, and not touching the enemy, you could get to the treasure and say, I pick up the treasure as your action. You have done that. But if the rules say, if you are within 1 inch of an enemy is defined as an uncontrolled creature or one of your opponent's warband members. The enemy can automatically engage you in combat if you're within that 1/2. If it's 1 inch. Now, for an uncontrolled creature or random creature, it always happens. If you end your movement within 1 inch of a random creature, that random creature will automatically snap to you and engage. It's the rules of the game. You are now engaged. But there are times when you may choose that you do not want to engage an opponent's warband member. I mentioned that example of running and grabbing the treasure. Well, if that were my opponent doing that, I don't want him getting that treasure, so I'm going to automatically, because I'm within 1 inch, I'm going to choose to snap my soldier into combat, and he's going to have to fight me for that treasure. But there might be a situation where one of my enemies runs by me and is still within 1 inch of me, ends his movement, and I may choose not to engage in combat. Why wouldn't I want to engage in combat? Well, I may want to gang up on him. I may want to have more than one soldier facing him for some bonuses. And we'll get into that when I get into a topic called group activation. There's also a possibility, and I've had this happen, where an opponent had a soldier type within range of me, but their movement ended, and I chose not to engage, but I chose instead to move my soldier to another bit of combat. Rather than do 1-to-1, I helped one of my fellow soldiers and did a 2-to-1. Now, you may ask, why didn't he just run base to base with me? He wanted me, I think it was a misunderstanding of the rules. He wanted me to spend one of my movements, or spend my movement action to move towards him, and then I would have just had the attack action, which would have happened any other way. But even if he had engaged me base to base, I still wouldn't have been able to move because I was engaged. I would have had an attack. The difference is, if I beat him, I would have been able to move 6 inches away. And his thinking, I believe, because I remember asking him why he did it, his thinking was, if I don't touch his base, he can move 6 inches, but he'll have to spend his move action just moving that 1 inch. He was not aware of that rule, and he lost on it. I was able to take my soldier because he thought I was going to engage him, and instead I moved my soldier over here where he had a better advantage. So, know the rules. You, as the person who moves, you do not get to decide unless you move base to base. If you place a miniature within 1 inch of an uncontrolled creature or an enemy miniature, they get to choose whether or not they engage you in combat. Okay? Here's another one. This is one of those where it can make a difference. It's when you have a shooter versus a target, an archer, a crossbowman, something like that, or even a wizard with a spell. All right. So just so you know, if an archer moves before they fire, they suffer a penalty. It's called a hasty shot. It's like they're running and then they shoot. So there is this penalty applied. It's called hasty shot. And in the book, it's written as a +1 modifier. And it's applied to the target. Okay? So let's say the archer opponent is shooting my thug. I'm the target, he's the shooter. Frequently, you will see this in a lot of Frostgrave games. A lot of games, the opponent, when they take an action, they will take the penalty, the shooting penalty, on themselves. And what I mean by that is, rather than I, the target, get the +1 to my roll, the shooter will say, I'll just take a -1 on my roll. And you're like, -1, +1, okay, it'll even out. Usually, that's the case. You can play around with different scenarios, just write them out, archer versus shooter, and just play with it. And you'll see that if the archer is +1, or if the target is +1 or the archer's -1, it usually ends up, just what's a zero sum. It doesn't matter. But it does matter when there are things like cover involved, because the rule for shooting modifiers is this. The shooting modifiers are all of them are applied to the target's roll. All right, and you think again, well, okay, heavy cover. Heavy cover is when one of your miniatures is touching base-to-base contact with a bit of terrain, but most of it is hidden. There's like a small, like less than half is visible. That's called heavy cover, and it is a +4 modifier to the target. All right, so let's just play around with this for a little bit so I can show you an example. This applies to both defender and offender, aggressive player or defensive player. Both, whether you're playing offensively or defensively, you need to apply this rule correctly, and you're going to see why in just a second. Let's assume that the archer is just +2 to shoot. That's it, +2. No other modifiers, no magic bow, +2 to shoot. Let's assume the thug has not been magically modified. He is 10 armor, 10 health, and he's +2 to fight. All right, so remember, when you're defending versus a shooting attack, you use your fight, +2. All right, so the shooter's +2, the thug is +2, the shooter just moved, the shooter moved into position, there is a +1 hasty shot, and there's a +4 heavy cover. Okay, now let's play the way you're not supposed to do it. Let's give the shooter his -1, right, on his roll, and give me the target my cover, which is +4. Let's say, you may want to write all this down if you can't keep track of it. Let's say the archer rolls a 14, and me, the defender, I roll an 8. Got it? 14 -1, he's taking the -1 shoot, is a 13. I'm taking the 8 +4, which is a 12. I still lose. The target number now is 13 minus my armor. The shooter only does 3 damage. That's good for me as the defender, because apply the hasty shot to the defender now. The archer rolls a 14. I roll an 8. I get +1 hasty shot, that makes it a 9, and then I get 4 +4 for the cover, which is a 13. 14 to 13. I still lost. 14 minus 10 is 4 points of damage. The shooter has now done 4 damage versus 3 when the shooter applied the -1. All right? So, when you're the shooter, when you are the aggressive player, you want to make sure all the modifiers are applied to the defender, because you're going to do more damage, at least in that example. You can play around with various numbers. Give the archer a 16 and the thug a 12, and just play with the numbers, and you'll see how it works out. It doesn't work out that way every time, and usually when you just apply one modifier, it'll zero out. But that's why the rules state all modifiers should go to the target, because it can make a difference in the damage you do. That's for the aggressive player. For the defending player, okay, if the aggressive player takes the -1, I'm cheating. I'm not playing fair. As the defensive player, I need to say, no, that +1 belongs to me. The player may say, well, it doesn't matter. Well, okay, whip out your paper and pen and show them, but it does. So if you want to play by the rules with your opponent, it means play by the rules. So as the defender, you may take the harder hit by applying all the modifiers, as that example showed. I will take 4 damage versus 3. But I play by the rules. And so that's one of those things where you as the player need to know. If you're aggressive, you definitely want that. If you're the defensive player, you want to know that so that you can not be accused of taking advantage of your opponent. All right, that's one of those examples. Shooting into combat. Okay, this one is really, really easy. If you want to shoot into combat where you have an opponent and you have one of your warband members, before you make the shooting attack, you have to say, I'm shooting into combat, and you roll a die. You can roll a D20, D10, whatever, but it's a 50-50 shot. You tell your opponent, on an 11 to 20, I hit my own guy. On a 1 to 10, I'll hit yours. You roll the die and you see what happens. You have a 50-50 shot of hitting your own warband member. Now, this could be firing a spell. No, actually, that's not true. When you do a spell, usually the spells are cast on an individual. I'm talking about with an archer or a crossbowman, all right? So your archer or your crossbowman wants to fire into combat. You have a 50-50 chance of hitting your opponent. You have a 50-50 chance of hitting yourself. Either way, you have wasted a fire action, an action by shooting, and you could theoretically take out one of your own warband members. So here's my thing. Not shooting into combat, you have a 100% chance success of not hitting your own warband member, but you have a 50% chance of hitting your warband member. I think the 100% beats the 50 any time. However, there are always exceptions, right? You have to decide, I wrote this down, you have to decide whether the reward, which is taking out the enemy warband member, is worth the risk. And at this point, the risk could be just losing your warband member, but it could be that the enemy is holding the treasure token. Okay? So do you want to take that 50-50 shot and possibly hurt that? Now, if you win in combat, if you hit them and you win, they do not, I don't think they get knocked back. If you're in base-to-base contact and you win, you can shove the enemy back 1 inch. But if you shoot the enemy from a distance and they're engaged in combat, I don't believe they get knocked back 1 inch. I could be wrong about that, but I don't think that's the case. So you have to take into consideration initiative. Initiative is the die roll you roll at the beginning of each turn to see who goes first, right? Well, let's say you lose the initiative on the next turn. That could mean that the player, if these are soldiers, that could be on the soldier phase, your enemy gets to bring in a second soldier for an advantage, 2 to 1, and gets to strike first, right? So you may not have any control about that. Versus you win the initiative, you might choose to just go ahead and fight 1 to 1, a fair battle, if it's a thug versus a thug, and then shove them back 1 inch. And then your archer could shoot and hit 100, well, at least hit an enemy 100% of the time, or miss an enemy 100% of the time. So shooting into combat, I've seen players do it. They're like, yeah, I'm going to do it. And I've seen them take out their, like with a high roll, like an 18 or 19, I've seen them take out their own soldier. And I didn't have to lift a finger, you know. I just, as a rule, I choose not to hit my own soldier 100% of the time by not shooting into combat. All right, another rule that you need to remember is that all successfully cast spells have a final casting roll of 14. Why is this important? You're like, no, my casting roll only requires an 8 and I rolled a 9. It's successful. The spell is successful, but from that point forward in the game, or at least in that round, that number is considered to be 14. Why is that the case? All right. I had to explain this one once to a player, and so I think I've kind of got it understood. So let's say you have a spell like Wall. No, that's a bad example. Let's say you have a spell like Mind Control, and I can't remember the name of it, but where you can take over another player. Okay, you roll to see if you successfully cast it. You have to beat their will roll. They get a will plus whatever or minus whatever, and let's say the target number is a 7. And you roll an 8. You succeed in taking over because they rolled a 2 and they rolled a 6. So you beat them. You take over their hero. Well, the rules say, you know, at the end of every, or at the beginning of every soldier phase, anyone under control can roll another will roll. Well, and it's usually versus the spells, there's a word for it, final casting roll. They'll call it. You have to remember what that roll was. So if it was an 18, you need to remember that because it was very high. They've got to roll a 19 or 20 to beat it. They don't have to roll very high to beat an 8. So you're being penalized for reducing the cost of one of your spells' target number, so it's easier for you to cast and easier for you to roll a lower number and still cast it successfully. But it also means that target number is low and your opponent might be able to beat that low number. This rule is for those particular instances where if the target number is under 14 and the player has to do a roll versus the final casting number, that final casting number bumps to a 14. And so, or 14 or higher, whichever value was higher, 14 or the actual die roll. That's why I say if you roll an 18, you take the 18. It doesn't drop to 14. It's only if it's less than 14. All right. Remember, only the apothecary can transfer a potion. This is a big one. The apothecary, the rules say the apothecary can give the single healing potion they carry, can give it to another warband member as an action. Included in that giving action is the warband member drinking it and healing for 5. The apothecary can use it themselves. It's not an action on the soldier's turn to drink it. It's built into the giving. So the apothecary is the only one that can do that. If you have a healing potion in the hands of your wizard or your apprentice or another soldier other than apothecary, that potion is for them. Okay, the apothecary is the only one that can transfer a healing potion. Dropping a treasure counts as an action. Just keep that in mind. If you are running and you see a bad guy or an uncontrolled creature coming at you, you can't just say, "Oh, I dropped the treasure and hit." You have to. It's an action. Dropping a treasure is an action. Simple as that. Here's another one. Okay. At some point, if you play long enough, you're going to have multiple uncontrolled creatures on the tabletop. Okay. You might have a werewolf, 3 rats, some wolves, whatever. And I make this mistake all the time. Usually, you and the opponent will decide, "Oh, okay, well, let's do the frogs, and then we'll do the wolves, and we'll do the werewolf." That is wrong. The creatures on the creature phase will attack in the order of highest health to lowest health. The werewolf typically being the high, assuming all the creatures are still fully healthy, the werewolf should have the highest health. It will move and attack first. Why is that? Well, think about it. The werewolf might engage a soldier and take him down to 1 or 2 health, which is going to be more than enough for the frogs to come in and finish him off. However, if it was the opposite, let's say the frogs come in and do, no damage, the werewolf has to do it all, right? They have to do the heavy work to take that soldier out. So the rules have been designed that way so that it's against the players. It gives the advantage to the uncontrolled creatures, gives them a chance to live. You're supposed to go in order of highest health to lowest health. Now, if you beat that werewolf up and he's just got 1 hit point left, great. The wolves will probably engage next, then the werewolf. I've seen that one played way wrong way too many times. I have done it myself. So just remember that. And I tell you that because as a novice player or a beginning player, it could make the difference. Your opponent, who may not know that rule or may gloss over it or just forget it, if the werewolf is very close to one of their soldiers, let's say he's carrying a treasure, it may be advantageous to point out that it's not advantageous. It's your job as a player to play by the rules. So you should say, well, the rules say the highest health goes first. That will force the werewolf to attack your opponent. Depending on the success or failure of that attack, can make a change to the tactics of your opponent, and it could go your way, right? So don't just say, well, we'll move them and then move them and then move them. Do it by the rules, because those rules are there to, well, they're there to be the rules of the game, but for a novice player, knowing those rules is going to be, it could mean life or death to your warband. So, and if you'll remember, I wrote this one down, but I already covered it. The last man standing does not automatically get the treasure. You have to roll a 15 or higher for each treasure that's left on the table. If you are the last warband on, and your enemy has already fled the table, and there's 2 treasures left that have not been picked up, you have to roll a d20 for both of those, and on a 15 or higher, you then get those treasures. Otherwise, they are sort of lost to nature, so to speak.
Check out the new RPG and Wargame Newsletter. Each week, the Tabletop Engineer shares news, products, Kickstarters, and much more related to the gaming hobby. It's free to subscribe, so check out the link in the video description below to sign up.
All right, let's talk game plan. This one's the big one for the discussion, and this is one of those that when I was sort of listening to James explain his game, and he really didn't have a game plan. He just was rolling dice, and he just said the game just went by in a whirl. So I was thinking to myself, there are so many ways that players can come to a game with a game plan. Now, if you talk to anybody who's played Frostgrave a bit, and you want to talk strategy with them, inevitably I find that most Frostgrave players, when they're talking strategy, it is strategy that is spell and soldier focused. What I mean by that is the strategies that they're describing, they're not basic strategies, they're more advanced because they rely on a school of magic, 1 or 2 particular spells that they particularly favor, and then maybe 1, 2, or even 3 soldier types that they tend to focus on. And that combination means you are dealing with a player who has a very specific game plan based on their soldier types and their spells. That is not the purpose of this video. The purpose of this video is to help James and new players and novice players learn, those new to the game or considering the game. It's to help them learn for their first game. Like, I don't know if I picked the right school of magic. I don't know if I picked the right spells, and I don't know if I picked the right soldiers. So help me figure out how to survive this game and maybe come out of this game, a little further along where my wizard is a little more powerful. So what I want to do is right off, I want to say that because there are so many multiple strategies, I've chosen here not to focus on them, but instead to just divide the strategies down the middle, and we'll call them aggressive players and defensive players. Now, I fall into the 70-30%, 70% defensive, 30% offensive. Most players that I play against, I would say they are 70 to 80% offense players and 20 to 30% defense players, the flip. I play plenty of war games where it's a win, I win, you lose. Frostgrave, as I mentioned, both players can come away from the game winning in their mind. But there are war games out there where, nope, you won, I lost, that's the end of that. And I play those games, and when I do, I'm usually playing them, in my definition, I'm usually playing them aggressively, offensively. And so the fact that I play a game of Frostgrave defensively made me think about it. Why do I play that way? Well, I'm playing typically in a campaign against other opponents. We have a group here that we trade players and we meet when we can, and we try to get in like 1 game a month, sometimes 2 games a month. But we're playing for the long term. We're playing to see how powerful our wizard can get. So I'm not looking at like the next game. I'm looking at 8 games down, 10 games down. Where do I want my wizard to be? And I want my wizard to be high stats and low casting rolls, all right? So that I can be more aggressive when he's more powerful and go get maybe 3 treasures instead of 2, or get 4 instead of 3, and increase my gold and increase my magic items and maybe find some grimoires and things like that. But let's jump back to the beginning of a campaign. Whether you're an experienced player or a beginner player, let's just divide that down by offensive versus defensive. And let's talk about some of the pros and cons. All right, so I'm going to first talk offensive because it's the one I know I play least when it comes to Frostgrave. So I am sure that I'm missing some stuff. So I do welcome my viewers to contribute any thoughts they may have on this offensive strategy. As long as they're not spell focused or soldier focused, they're welcome, because otherwise you're getting into the nitty gritty, and that may be for a later video, probably will be a later video. So as an offensive player, I'll put myself in those shoes. What am I trying to do? Well, obviously I'm trying to get XP. We've already talked about that. How much XP? Well, if I'm playing offensively, I want as much XP as I can. I'm shooting for 300 every game. If I'm not shooting for 300 every game, I'm shooting for at least 4 treasures. 3 would be fine. I can take 3, but 4 is ideal. All right? Let me jump to the defensive player side. That's me. One of my goals with every game I play is I want to leave the table with at least 2 treasures. At least 2. I'll take a third if it presents itself. But if I leave with 2 treasures and I hit 200 XP, which I'll talk about in a minute, I'm happy. But let's go back to the offensive player. If I want 2 as the defensive and the offensive player wants 4, well, there's going to be a treasure there that's in contention. If he wants all 5 treasures and I want 2, he's got to come fight for 2 of them. All right? Combat is risky. You risk losing one of your warband members. If your thug fights my thug, one of us is going to probably, when we roll, this is not a game where, it's not like some war games or some RPGs where I roll to hit you and you roll to see if you defend. If I attack you, we both are rolling attack rolls, and whoever rolls the highest wins, and then damage is applied versus their armor. So if you're coming into my thug who's got a treasure or near a treasure and you want to fight my thug over it, there's a chance. There's a chance you may not walk away from this. Okay? So being an offensive player, you better be bringing, if you want to take my treasures, because the way you're going to maximize your XP is by denying me XP. I can cast all the spells in the world and I can get that 40 for showing up, but casting spells is only getting me 10 per. I've got to cast 30 successful spells, or, well, 15 for the apprentice and the wizard, and they have to be perfectly successful in order to get me to that 300. That doesn't happen. So I know as a defensive player I need at least 1 or 2 treasures, preferably 2, and I'll explain that in a minute. So as the offensive player, if I want it all, I got to go get it. And that is risky. I get, as the offensive player, I get 40 for showing up. Let's say I get 4 treasure tokens. That's 160, 4 times 40, plus my 40 show up. I'm now at 200. Most offensive players, if they think about it, they should be satisfied with that and try to protect their wizard and apprentice. At least get their wizard and apprentice off the map, and then let their soldiers do whatever they want to do. But inevitably, what I find is a lot of offensive players, they get that 200, they're going for gold. They want to go for 300. They want to get that last treasure, or they want to get the last treasure from you. They've got 4, but you've got 1, and they want that 1. Well, as a defensive player, I've now become the offensive, sort of, because I need that 1. For XP purposes, and quite honestly, I'm going to make you earn it. I'm going to have my wizard and my apprentice and all my soldiers. They're going to be protecting that, and you're going to pay for it. You're going to pay dearly. Now, keep in mind, a treasure is worth 40 XP. Now, it's also worth a roll on the treasure table, which could get you gold, potions, scrolls, grimoires, magic items, magic weapons, magic armor, that kind of thing. But ultimately, it's worth 40 XP. I have to question, are you willing to fight for 40 XP as the offensive player and risk losing a 125 gold coin soldier like a barbarian or a knight. Now, if you send a thug over, you know, the odds are in my favor. If I've got enough soldiers left and a wizard and apprentice, that thug, he's a thug. He's not going to last long. So you're going to have to send one of your big boys over. And if you do get that treasure, or if you manage to dislodge it, but your soldier dies, your barbarian or knight dies, I consider that a win. Because there is a chance they'll roll off game and that character will be permanently dead. They are out 125 gold. If they're not permanently dead, there's a good chance they'll be wounded, which means they'll lose a stat modifier of some sort. Like maybe their movement speed drops or something like that. But I am going to make them hurt if they attempt to take my last treasure. And I really take that attitude for 2 treasures. If my goal as defense is to take 2 treasures, I'm going to make the offensive player earn it if they want 4 or all 5 treasures. So keep in mind that showing up and getting 4 treasures gets you up to 200. If you want that remaining 100 as an offensive player, you got to get that extra treasure for 40, and then you still got to cast a bunch of spells to get up to 300. Or you can let me have that treasure, and then you got to cast even more spells to get up to 300. So I always kind of laugh at the. I don't laugh. I don't understand it, but that's because I'm a defensive player when it comes to Frostgrave. Let's switch over to that reason, and maybe that'll help you understand why I sort of snicker a little bit at the offensive players. As a defensive player, how many XP points do I need? If you said 300, you're wrong. I don't go for 300. I go for 200. I need at least 200 XP per game to be happy. Why? Because I've already explained, learning a new spell costs 100 XP. But you have to have found a grimoire. You have to have gotten a treasure token and rolled a grimoire, which contains a spell, to obtain a spell. And then you can spend that 100 to learn it. The odds of you getting a grimoire are, what did I say, 65% versus 35%. 65% you won't find one, 35% you will, because on a D20 chart, there's only like 14 through 20 will get you a grimoire. The rest, 1 through 13, if you roll it, does not. So you have a 65% chance of not rolling a grimoire. So any extra XP you get, you got to bank it. Can't use it during this game. So if I am sort of defensive in nature and I'm only going for 200, why am I only going for 200? Because I can only increase 1 stat per game, and I can only decrease 1 spell per game. That's all you can do. You can't decrease. Let's say you have 300 XP. You can't take that extra 100 and decrease another spell by 1 or add another stat to 1. You can only do those 2 actions once per game. So if I hit 200, my wizard is always reducing. If I hit 200 every game, my wizard is always increasing an attribute by 1 and always decreasing a spell cost by 1. And that's ultimately what I'm going for long term. Learning new spells, great. If I can learn a new spell that I find luckily in a grimoire and I roll randomly and I'm lucky enough to find a spell out of the 80 spells minus 8, out of the 72 spells left over, I just so happen to roll 1 lucky spell that benefits my wizard. Great, I'll spend the 100 XP to learn it. But it's still going to have a super high target number, which is going to be very difficult to roll because most likely it's going to be an allied spell, which adds +2 to the target number, or a neutral spell, which adds +4. If it's opposed, it's +6. So new spells sound great, and they can be if you get lucky with the rolls. But usually there are spells that you just don't care. The only reason you want grimoires really is so you can get a duplicate of a grimoire so you can sell it, because grimoires bring in like 200 gold if you sell them, but you can't sell your original. If you get a grimoire with a new spell that you don't know, you cannot sell that. Even if you don't learn the spell, you have to keep it. It's only if you get a duplicate of it that you can sell the duplicate. So as a defensive player, I'm going for 200. Well, let's do the math. 40 for showing up. That leaves me with 160. If I can get 2 treasures, that brings me up to 80 plus the show up. I'm at 120. I need 80 more XP. How do I get 80? Well, I could, in 4 rounds, if both wizard and apprentice each cast successful spells, I'll get 80. I get 20 per per round if they both are successful. So 4 turns or 4 rounds is 80, and I can go home. But odds are I won't always get success. I'll have a few failures in there. And if I think back to all my games, I usually do have more successes than I do failures, but that's because I'm rolling those spells that have lower target numbers because they're my key spells. So let's just say it takes 6 rounds to hit that 80. The first 2 rounds, you're not usually doing a whole lot. You're usually positioning your players or getting out front, heading towards the treasures you want, which leaves just 4 turns. I don't think a lot of players think about in terms of the number of turns, but if you are a defensive player like me and you're playing a notorious aggressive player, they usually, in my mind, aren't thinking number of turns. They're thinking, as long as this game's got to go, I'm leaving with 300 XP and 5 treasures. Let them. Because if you come into this game knowing you don't need 300 XP, you just need 200. I don't need to cast 18 spells. I only need to cast like 9 mix of success failure to hit that 200. You can do what your opponent wants to do in half the time. And that only comes into play if you can sort of, I don't know, waste time, move your wizard and apprentice to places where they can't be targeted, but they may necessarily not be moving to where they can enhance the game. Sometimes you just move characters to get that move action, but also to further the game along. Sometimes you just move them just so you can get to the wizard and the apprentice phase so you can cast spells. It's not a great way to think about the game. I'm getting us off topic here, but sometimes you have to think, how many turns do I want my wizard and apprentice to be putting themselves at risk before I call this game a success? And so that's why I know I'm a defensive player, because I think like that. I want 200 XP. I get 40 for showing up. I get 80 if I can get 2 treasures, just 2 treasures off the table. If my opponent can be happy with 3 and he's not going to be super aggressive while I sneak 2 off, I'm going to hit my goal, because it's only going to take me 5 or 6 turns to get a mix of success and failure spell casts to hit it. And if some uncontrolled creatures should show up and I'm able to kill 1 or 2 and I can get 5 XP for a couple of them, I'm that much closer. So I guess to wrap this particular discussion up is, as a new player, there's a lot to learn with this game. What you can do is come into the game with a game plan of, I want to get this much XP and I want to get this many treasure tokens. And if I can do that and get them off the board, I feel like I did a successful game and I can move on to game number 2. I think a lot of players will play to the last man standing, and that is not what Frostgrave is about. Now, some players do play it's like take out the opposite warband. I don't have a problem with it if you want to come gunning for my warband, but if we're playing a campaign and you want to play that way, you're going to be spending money, just constantly getting new soldiers, because you're going to lose soldiers. Whereas if I play defensively and I'm concerned about my soldiers and I want them to survive to fight in the next game, I don't have to spend more gold on them. Then when I do get treasure tokens, I don't have to sell those treasures to get gold so I can buy replacement soldiers. Again, this all comes with playing the game and playing multiple games. Once you play 2, 3, or 4 games in a campaign, this stuff starts to click. You start realizing that, man, I'm spending a lot of gold on getting soldiers and they keep dying. Well, okay, it's time to evaluate your play style. If your play style is hinting at the offensive, aggressive nature, but you're not playing the game aggressively, if you're playing defensively but you're sending your soldiers out and you're going for every treasure, you're in conflict. You have to tune your game, your offense or your defense game. You have to tune it to what you bring to the table. And again, that will come down to School of Magic and your spell slots, because even though I'm not talking spells in this video, if you pick a lot of offensive spells, like a lot of targeting spells of the enemy and things, you're painting yourself into a corner where if you don't play aggressively, your wizard and your apprentice aren't going to be much help to your warband. Whereas if you have a lot of defensive spells that buff your soldiers and stuff, and you're playing defensively, you're wasting your soldiers, you're wasting your spells because your soldiers may never see combat. So again, it all comes with experience. It does come with selecting soldiers and spells, and that will tweak. Let's say you choose that you say, I'm a more aggressive player, I'm a more defensive player. Well, you're more aggressive and you're more defensive. And then after you pick your spells and your soldiers, you may have to reevaluate that. Your choices could further strengthen your game plan, or it could hurt it, or it could force you to change your game plan. You may pick a wizard, pick your spells, and then after that first game you realize, oh man, this wizard really is not offensive in nature. I should be playing defensive. Well, you learn something. The next game, start playing more of a defensive game and see how it goes. Now, again, I said I'm not going to talk spells and soldiers, but I will say this. Between games, you get gold and treasure, hopefully. There is always that phase between games where you can change your style of play. It depends on the scenario. There may be a scenario where you're forced to play defensively. Like maybe everything is hurting you, or there's creatures galore and you're just on the defensive. Well, the scenario has defined your gameplay. But there's going to be a lot of scenarios where you may have to play opposite of what you're used to doing. And again, you won't know that until you and your opponent pick the game you want. Now, if you pick the scenario you want before you play, you could take your gold that you have and you could customize your soldiers. You can't change your spells, but you can change your soldier types if you think that's going to help. And we'll talk about soldiers in just a bit, and I'll give you some advice there that may help you when it comes time to deciding which soldiers to buy versus which soldiers not to buy. So there you go. Offensive, defensive, pick one. Pick one and go with it. Don't go halfway, because typically if you go halfway, you're going to lose momentum if you switch. Halfway through the game, if you're playing offensively and all of a sudden you have to play defensively, your player, if they've been playing consistently, your opponent, they're not going to lose momentum. You're going to lose momentum because you have to regroup or readjust your strategy and figure out where you are, and it's pandemonium. So I typically tell players, or I do it myself, is when I go into a game, I say, this is my objective. And even if I'm losing soldiers, but my objective is slowly but surely being met as I march forward, I keep at it. And that's all part of any war game, actually. All right, let's talk some nuts and bolts now, but we're still dealing with basics. And I'm talking about soldier comparisons, because keep in mind, you have to, for your first warband, you have to have at least 4 standard soldiers, and you can have no more than 4 specialists. You can have 8 standard, but you can never have more than 4 specialist soldiers. Now, there may be exceptions to that with some spells, or there may be some rules in some expansion books that break that. But for the core rules, typically that's the rule. 4 standard, 4 specialist. All right, so here's what you need to know. Thugs. Thugs are free. They are your basic soldier. They have +2 fight, 10 armor, 10 health. I will tell you this. I cannot count how many games I have played where my thug went into combat. The enemy rolled an 18, 19, or 20. 18 minimum to do this. 18, 19, or 20. Anytime you have a thug and the opponent rolls an 18, 19, or 20, and they have at least a plus, and they have a thug or higher with a +2 fight, your thug's dead. Because it works out that they're gonna hit 20 or higher. 20 minus the 10 armor means 10 damage. A thug has 10 health. Goodbye, thug. It happens so much. I mean, you don't even have to think about it. If I'll see the die, I'll go 18, thug's dead. He goes, my thug attacks your thug, 19. I'll be like, thug's dead. It's just you play enough, you get to where you know the numbers. But for the other soldier types, you have to sometimes do the math. But I use the thug for a particular purpose, and this part of the video you may just gloss over and jump to the next section. This is more for the math nerds who like to play war games. I actually have done this, and what I think I'll do is I'll post my little spreadsheet. I'll copy it as text into the video description so you can see it. So when I am trying to decide on my warband, you know, a lot of people will go 4 thugs or 4, you know, they'll, remember, you only have 300 gold. 100 of that is going to be spent on the apprentice. And we're going to talk about buy apprentice or no buy apprentice later in the video. But the apprentice costs you 100 gold. So if you spend it out of the 400 you start with, it leaves you 300 gold to buy your soldiers. Now thugs are 0, but everything, thugs and thieves are free. But everything past that has a cost. Anywhere from 10 gold for a warhound up to 125 for a knight, a templar, a ranger, a barbarian, or a marksman. So this may seem a little overwhelming, but let me tell you how I think about it. All right, let's look at the thug stat line. The thug has a 6 move, +2 fight, +0 shoot, 10 armor, -1 will, and a 10 health. That is the thug stat bar. So what we could do is we could look at every soldier type and compare them to a thug and see what their per... All right, let me take a step back. Let's talk, we have a thug. Let's imagine something called an advanced thug. The advanced thug is identical to the regular thug with one exception. He has 11 health. He's got +1 health over the basic thug. He is 1 stat point higher than the standard thug. Now, let's modify the advanced thug. Let's say his move is 5. Well, the thug is 6, so the advanced is 5. So he has dropped -1 point. It cancels the +1 health, so he's a 0 net, right? The advanced has a +1 health, but a -1 move. So for all practical purposes, comparing the total of the stat values, adding them up, it's a net 0. It's the same stats as the thug, but here's where it comes into play. What if the advanced thug cost 10 gold? Is it a good buy or not? Well, it does depend on the situation. That 1 extra health and 10 armor, it could break that typical thing I just described where the thug takes 10 damage, has 10 armor, and loses 10 health. But if they have 11, they got 1 hit point left, 1 health left. But they're also moving slower. They have a -1 move. So there are situations where that might, for 10 gold, you might want that +1 health and you don't care about that -1 move. But technically, if you look at them, they're sort of, the advanced thug is not good because you're getting a net 0 change in the attributes, but you're having to pay 10 gold for it. You're basically giving 10 gold for a thug and then tweaking 2 of his attributes, bumping 1 up and knocking the other one down, and you just spent 10 gold to do it. That might be advantageous to you, but the reason I explain this is because this is how I'm going to be explaining the other soldiers. So when you look at, for example, you may want to get a pen and paper out. Let's look at the apothecary, because the apothecary is one of my favorite soldier types now. I just picked up on this after quite a few games with my friend Robert. I'm going to give Robert a shout out. The apothecary, for all practical purposes, is a thug, sort of, but the apothecary has 6 move +1 fight. He's not as good in a fight as the thug. However, he has 2 health or 12 health for a bonus of 2, and his will goes up to +3. So let's do the math. He's lost 1 for fight, then he goes up 4 for will. Is that right? Yeah, 0, 1, 2, 3. Yeah. So he's up now to +2, and then he goes up 2 health. So he's at a +4 over the thug. If the thug is 0, if you compare the attributes, he's 4 points higher in attributes, and he costs 75 gold. So an apothecary is +4, +2 is 6, -1 is 5. He's net 5. Excuse me, I said he was 4. He's net 5 change. If you divide his cost of 75 gold by that net 5, it comes out to approximately 15, well, not approximately, equal to, it's 15 gold per improvement point. You're basically paying 15 gold for each point that the apothecary is better than the thug. But here's where it gets better. The apothecary, there's two things about the apothecary. I already mentioned one. He is the only one who can transfer a healing potion. He gets a healing potion at the beginning of every game. A healing potion is 50 gold. So you could either say that the apothecary has a value of 125 gold because he's got that potion, or you could say the apothecary is basically a 25 gold soldier carrying a 50 gold potion. That's how I prefer to think about it. If you do it that way, you have a 25 gold character divided by the 5 attribute points. You're paying 5 gold coins for each plus in the improvement of stats compared to a thug, and you're getting a 50 gold coin health potion to boot. That's why out of all of the soldier types, I call the apothecary out first, because that is the lowest you're going to get per attribute point, 5 gold, assuming you take the potion out of the cost of the equation. That's the lowest you're going to get out of all the soldiers except for the thief, because the thief is also 0. And I hear you're going, well, the Warhound. Okay, let's talk the Warhound. I have played so many games where the Warhound was on my opponent's side. People love the Warhound. Why? Because it's got an 8 move. And if it double moves on its second action, it can move a total of 12 inches during its turn. If you're playing on a 3x3 game mat, that means in 3 turns, it can be from one side to the other if it's not stopped by terrain or a soldier or something like that. So it only takes 3 turns for that warband to get across the table. A lot of players, especially aggressive players, they will use a Warhound to go straight for the throat of an apprentice or a wizard. It's a good strategy, but it fails to take into mind that if you're sicking your dog on my on my wizard, I've got plenty of time to put some targets in front of my wizard to protect him. My wizard might have a spell or two that he could successfully cast on that Warhound that's barreling down on me. And as the offensive player, you have bought a Warhound which is taking up a slot, one of your 8 slots of soldiers. Because here's the deal, the Warhound is only +1 fight. He's fast, but he's only +1 fight. If I throw a thug in front of him, the thug has a 5% chance higher of winning the battle. Not much, but it's there. His armor is 10, same as the thug, but guess what? His health is 8. 8. So he's not even got the health of a thug. Throw in the fact that the Warhound cannot pick up and carry a treasure, and you have basically selected a fast attack soldier type with low health, with a lower fighting ability than most soldier types. Your enemy is going to get 2, maybe 3 attacks on that Warhound to end it or to stop it. And you've lost a space. That's one soldier type you cannot fill because you took a Warhound. So anyway, so let's talk about a Warhound. The Warhound, by the way, is +2 move, -1 fight, so we're still up 1 point. It's -2 will, so we're now -2. And it's 8 health, so we're down -4. You have lost 4 attribute value points, and it costs you 10 gold. Is it a wise choice? I mean, you don't have to spend extra money to get the, you can't divide, you're losing 2 gold if you take that 4 into 10. You're losing 2.5 gold per attribute point that you've lost. So you're really paying more than 10 if you think about it. All right, so Warhound, let's knock that out. As a beginner, I would never recommend putting a soldier spot, taking one up with a Warhound, because you're not going to get the value out of it. All right, I'm not going to go through every soldier, but I am going to go through a couple that I think are very important. I already mentioned the apothecary. When you can, the thug is 0 cost. I still think it's always a good idea, if you have the gold, to replace a thug with an apothecary. You get the healing potion. You go down to +1 fight versus +2. But the apothecary has 2 additional health. Its will is higher, so if the apprentice or the opponent apprentice or wizard casts a spell, instead of -1 that a thug has, the apothecary can roll +3, so it's likelier to survive a spell attack. But the big bonus is that healing potion. The apothecary can use it themselves to gain 5 hit points, 5 health, or if the apothecary moves to a injured soldier or wizard or apprentice, as your second action, you can give that potion. And as I mentioned, that giving action is also the drinking action, so it's instant. You use it to give the potion, and the other warband, whoever it's given to, gets 5 health. Huge, huge advantage on the field. Guess what? I only recently really thought about this. Because I was playing my friend Robert, and I kept going, why does he always bring an apothecary to the battle? I'm like, it's not that big of a deal for that healing potion. But then, after 2 games, I saw him give that healing potion to the right soldiers and heal them up. And I went and did the math on it, and I was like, he's right. I just never thought about it. So that's why I ran the numbers on all the soldiers. So when you have the gold, consider replacing a 0-cost thug with a 75 gold apothecary. And remember, you're getting a 50 gold health potion for free that could be a game changer. Here's another one. You want to replace your thug and you want a fighter type. Well, a standard fighter type. Well, the only 2 options really are infantryman and man-at-arms. And if you have your book, look at them. They pretty much, they're close. They both have 6 move. They both have +3 fight, +0 shoot. However, the infantryman has an armor of 11, +0 will, and only 10 health. Whereas the man-at-arms has 12 armor, +1 will, and 12 health. The infantryman is 50 gold, and the man-at-arms is 75. So there is a difference there. But if you take my approach of looking at their plus minuses compared to the thug, I've already done this for you. The infantryman, let me get this out of here. The infantryman compared to the man-at-arms, the infantryman compared to the thug, he's +1 fight, right? Where did I see that? Hold on. +1 armor. Now he's up 2. And he's +1 will, up to 3, and his health stays the same. So he's a net +3 incremental points over the thug for 50 gold. What does that come out to? It comes out to 16.7. Let's round it up. It comes out to 17 gold per attribute point. Now remember, if you take the 50 gold of the potion out of the apothecary, it comes down to 5 gold per incremental point. So the infantryman is way, way out of league with the apothecary. But let's look at the man-at-arms, which is one of my favorite soldier types. The man-at-arms is +1 on the fight. He's +2 to armor. He's +2 to will, meaning he's 2 higher points than the thug. And he's 2 higher on the health. So he's at 7. 7 net incremental points positive for 75. 75 divided by 7 is 10.7 gold per point. Let's just round it up to 11. For 11 gold coins, you can choose to buy a man-at-arms and get a 7-point improvement over the thug. Now, it gets better. Why? Well, I can still save money and get a better soldier if I choose the infantryman over the thug. Yeah, you can. But here's a problem. Look at the end game. Throughout your games, there are chances that you're going to roll on the treasure. You get a loot token. There are going to be opportunities where you roll a treasure token and you get a magic weapon or a magic armor. Okay? Now, most of these guys can use what's called a hand weapon. So if you roll a +1 damage hand weapon or a +1 to hit hand weapon, a lot of these soldiers can use it. But if you roll a shield, a magic shield, which the odds aren't good, but you might. If you have chosen an infantryman cannot use a hand weapon. They use a two-handed weapon. That's the only magic item that you can replace their weapon, two-handed. They also don't use a shield, so you can't give them a magic shield either. Now let's look at the man-at-arms. The man-at-arms uses a hand weapon. The hand weapon is one of the more, if you look at the magic treasure, let me get to it real quick. The magic weapon and armor table, hand weapon is 3 out of the 20. Two-handed is also 3 out of the 20. So technically, I guess you could argue that the infantryman has the same chance of getting a magic weapon on a treasure roll as the man-at-arms. But the magic shield is a +1. It's a roll of 20, so there's a 1 in 20 chance that you'll get a magic shield. But the infantryman can't use it. Only the man-at-arms can. Not a big deal. But I've had it happen where I got a magic shield and I didn't have anybody to wield it. Oh, by the way, the only specialist soldier that can wield a shield, at least in the core rules, is the knight. And I rarely play knights. So just something to think about. The knight also has a hand weapon. So in this sense, the hand weapon and the shield by the knight matches up to the man-at-arms. So if you have a man-at-arms and a knight and you get a shield and a +1 hand weapon, you could give them both to one, or you could split it and each one of them get a magic weapon. Something to think about. And it comes down to cost. Remember, I said that the man-at-arms is 11 gold coins versus 17 for the infantryman. You are going to get more bang for your buck, for your gold, if you buy a man-at-arms versus an infantryman. Enough said. All right. The last thing I want to talk about is archer versus crossbowman. Here's the fun part. It's on page 31 if you want to follow along. The archer and the crossbowman have identical stats. They also have an identical cost of 75 gold. They have 11 armor, they have 10 health, they have +1 fight and +2 shoot and 6 move, both of them. So what's the difference? Well, okay, the difference is crossbowman uses a crossbow. If you hit with a crossbow and it hits and you win the battle, it adds +2 to the damage roll. So if I roll an 18 and I win and your armor is 10, I do 8 damage and then I add the 2, so I did 10 damage. It's pretty nice. The archer does not get that. But the crossbowman has to spend an action to reload the crossbow. Now you think to yourself, that's not a big deal. They have to use an action. Well, remember, when a soldier takes a turn, they get 2 actions. They can move, and then they can move again or shoot or whatever. Now, the crossbowman is one of those interesting characters. He can give up his move for a reload and then shoot. So he can technically shoot in the same round that he reloads. The difference is he cannot move. He has stayed put. This has come back to haunt me. I've definitely made it haunt opponents where they had a crossbowman and he shoots. Well, if he is in the open, or if I can get one of my archers or one of my spellcasters or somebody where they have line of sight on that crossbowman, now my opponent has a decision to make. If I don't kill them, if I move an archer and I shoot and I hit and kill him, boom, he's dead anyway. But if I move and I shoot and I miss, my opponent has a decision to make on the next turn. They can either reload, shoot at my guy who's now line of sight, possibly kill him, and if so, he does. But if he misses, my soldier's going to come back around and take another shot. I'm going to get 2 shots on the archer versus his 1 at mine. Versus this option, the opponent has to use their move action to move the crossbowman into cover or out of line of sight. And then their final action, they either have to reload or do a double move because they can't shoot. They haven't reloaded, right? So given the cost of 75 gold, given the cost that their stats are identical, what's the takeaway? Well, they both come out to 25 gold per incremental point if you compare them to the thug using the method I described earlier. So not great. in terms of comparison to the Thug. But remember, they're in the specialist column. They are the cheapest of all of the specialists. They just get more expensive as you go down the line. So you have to ask yourself, am I willing to take a crossbowman, get the extra damage if he hits, but if I miss, my opponent might get one or more chances to shoot at my crossbowman who is now in line of sight or can be put in line of sight. I prefer the archer. The archer can shoot every turn, and they can also move every turn. They have no reload. Now, they don't get any bonus damage, but that bonus damage really doesn't appeal to me when I consider that by having two options available, I can move and shoot, versus the only options I have with the crossbowmen are move and reload, or reload and shoot. Those aren't acceptable to me. So again, it all comes down to your play mode, aggressive, defensive, and how you want to play that out. So I will take my little spreadsheet here, which tells you the cost per improvement point for the basic soldiers, and I'll cut and paste that somehow into the video description so you can see it. And some of the numbers might surprise you. Like for instance, the Ranger's not bad. He's 13.8 or 14 gold points per improvement point over the Thug. He's pretty good. The Treasure Hunter is also 12.5. He's not bad. The Treasure Hunter is a specialist soldier. His advantage is he's got a 7 move, which is huge. So you can use them to go after the treasure and get them off. And they do have +3, so they can defend against people shooting at them better than, say, a thug can. All right, so that is the end of the discussion on soldier types. Up next, I want to talk about this concept of apprentice or no apprentice. Okay, apprentice or no apprentice. This is a funny one. James actually asked me about this. He's like, do I have to buy the apprentice? And I'm like, because he's 100 gold, and it only leaves me 300. And I'm like, yeah, you don't have to buy the apprentice. The rules tell you don't have to. But let me just give you my rundown on the apprentice. The apprentice is not the lowest cost character in the I treat my apprentice as a specialist, but a specialist in the sense I'm not limiting to a spot, one of my warband spots. The apprentice costs 100 gold. The only ones that are cheaper are the archer and crossbowmen. They are 75. After that, everything else is 100 or 125 for your core soldier types. So your apprentice is on the low end for a specialist character. But remember, he also has, or she has, some benefits that you really need to think about. In the game, when you play, there are 4 phases. There is the wizard phase, the apprentice phase, soldier phase, and creature phase. If you should choose to not go with an apprentice, save that gold and apply it to more powerful soldiers, for example. If you choose to go without him, you are basically reducing your turn options by 25, well, if we don't count creature phase, you're reducing it by 33%. You're basically skipping an entire phase where you won't do anything. That's the apprentice phase. You also will not get to do what's called, with the apprentice, you will miss out on a group activation part of the turn, and I will be discussing group activation in just a bit. You will forego group activation. What else do you forego? Well, you forego anywhere from 5 to 10 XP per turn because you have no apprentice to cast spells. So you're automatically down at least 5 XP per round, but you could be down as much as 10 XP per round. So there's that to think about. If you're, as we mentioned, or as I mentioned earlier, your goal is XP. Your goal is to make your wizard more powerful. And by the way, when your wizard becomes more powerful, your apprentice follows along. Remember, your apprentice is -2 on a lot of the stats, like health, fight, will. So if your wizard's up to 20 health, your apprentice is at 18, which is more powerful than your starting wizard. So even though it's still called the apprentice, for all practical purposes, that apprentice is a very powerful wizard. your apprentice could handle a one-off game just by themselves, no wizard involved, against a low-level wizard. If you go up against a wizard, you're probably asking for trouble. So why would you not want an apprentice? You're giving up on XP. You lose a turn. You don't get to do group activation if you choose to want to do it. What does your apprentice offer you that, why would I not want an apprentice? Well, let me give you some other reasons why you want it before we go into why you might not want an apprentice. I frequently split my warband up into two halves of the tabletop, so that I have I double my line of sight chances with my wizard on one side and my apprentice on the other. Some players play with the apprentice and the wizard side by side, moving right up the middle. I mean, it probably works for a lot of people. It never works for me. I tend to split my party, and I do that so that I can focus on more than one treasure. Because if your wizard and apprentice are moving up the middle, they may see all the treasures, but they're closest to only one. Whereas if I have a wizard and apprentice that are on different halves of my starting side and I move them up, both of them are close to two treasures, right? If there's, or more. But at any given time, I am closer to more treasures than if they stay up the middle. Now, you could do middle and right or middle and left. The point is the same. By having that apprentice, I'm giving my warband bigger options for getting to the treasures, which is really what my goal is. Get two treasures off the table. I have a warband and apprentice. I have two spellcasters. I need two treasures. I basically split them up, and hopefully they can help the warband get those treasures off. The other thing the apprentice offers is a target. Okay, now this is going to sound bad. I don't like my apprentice to get knocked out of the game. But there have been times where I have dangled my apprentice out there in the hopes that maybe my opponent could be, convinced to lean to this side, right, and go to, because the apprentice looks more aggressive. He's going to put himself in danger, and I'm gonna take advantage of that. I sometimes use my apprentice as bait, only because if I lose that apprentice, it's going to stink. It's going to stink. But I can always buy a new one, and their stats don't start again at 0. The rules will allow you to train that apprentice up again, but you got to have the gold for it. So I do it that way. But the other reason I love having an apprentice is I typically will use my apprentice for the low-cost spells, or as low as they can get them. And I save my wizard for those spells that I need that might have a higher target number that is probably beyond what the apprentice should be casting. And I'm talking about numbers like 12, 13, where the apprentice would be trying to roll a 14 or 15. So the apprentice, I always like knowing that there are, and I also will frequently empower spells from my apprentice. If my apprentice gets too low on health, I'll cut and run. I'll get the apprentice off the map because I don't want to lose them. But if they miss a spell by 4 points, I'll cut for 4 hit points and raise that spell to a success. I get 10 XP, and I get whatever I was doing, casting a spell against an opponent or maybe a treasure or something like that, and I lost 4 health. But when my apprentice gets down to under like 8 health, it's usually it's time to either pull back and get some cover or get off the field. So, when would you not want an apprentice? Well, there's one way that is sort of out of your control. If your wizard dies, and I mean by permanent death, he gets knocked out of the game and then you roll on the injury chart and you get a 1 or 2 and he's dead. The rules allow for you to promote your apprentice to wizard and then you get another apprentice. Well, that's great, but what if you don't have the money right away? I mean, I've had high-level wizards that spent all their gold and they were like maybe burning fumes. So there's a very good possibility that you need to replace 3 or 4 soldiers and your apprentice if you had a really bad game. Well, you could replace that apprentice and then you might have to get all thugs. But if you're going up against a high-level opponent, 10, 20 level wizard who's got all super specialist, soldiers and stuff, thugs may not cut it. So there is a possibility that you may be forced in some games to bring your wizard into the game without an apprentice and whatever soldiers you can muster and afford, and hope you get some treasures that you can sell and some gold to then get you an apprentice for the next game. That's the only way I can think that it's sort of out of your control. If you should choose not to get an apprentice, the only reason I could think that you would want to do that is that you want to take that 100 gold and you want to put it straight into, it can't even buy you, that 100 gold can't even buy you one of the high-end soldiers by itself. So out of the 300, out of the 400 gold you now have, you could still buy 3 high-price specialists. That would get you up to 375, but the remaining 25 is not going to do anything. But that's the only reason I can think of, is that you know that maybe you know the next scenario is going to be more combat intensive, and there's not going to be a lot of options for spell casting. So maybe your apprentice just won't have as much power in the game, but a barbarian might, right? So again, it comes down to, you're going to have to judge the game. If you don't know what the scenario is and you haven't spent your gold before you get there, it may be a last-minute decision, but you can do those. There's no requirement that you have your warband soldiers replenished before you arrive at the game store or whatever. You can do that when you get there. You can do that after you find out what the scenario is. There's no rules there. I think sometimes it might be considered unfair play to find out what the scenario is and then go customize your warband. But if your opponent doesn't care, great. You may say, oh, well, I'm going to need to buff up some soldier types. But I really can't come up with any logical reason not to get an apprentice. Again, as I mentioned, you lose a phase, you lose group activation, you lose 5 to 10 XP, and you also control less of the battlefield because your wizard now has to see and manipulate everything within line of sight versus splitting the field into two ranges or two areas of effect. So it's a tough call. I really wasn't going to add this one to the video, but I know that James asked about it, and so I figure I might as well add my 2 cents. Not so much strategy as this is just personal opinion. The last thing I want to talk about is this concept of activation. It's really simple, but I'll be honest, when I first started playing Frostgrave, I had it wrong in some cases. So I'm going to clear that up right now. This is one of those that falls into the earlier conversation of know the rules. As a beginner, if you understand activation, you're much more likely to do it correctly or see your opponent doing it incorrectly and be able to fix it. And this could be a game changer for you. So here it is. We know that there are 4 phases in this game. There's wizard phase, apprentice phase, soldier phase, and creature phase. Let's throw out creature phase for right now. Let's actually throw out the soldier phase, because during the soldier and creature phase, anything that moves in those actions, in those phases, they can move first and then attack, for example, or they can attack and then move. The 2 actions are interchangeable. One of them has to be a move action, and the other one can be any action. Pick up a treasure, attack a warband member, but it could be a double move. It could be a half speed move. But let's look at the wizard phase and the apprentice phase. Okay, at its simplest, during the activation phase, the wizard activation phase, let's just have the wizard on the table. So it's the wizard phase. The wizard can move and then cast a spell. They could move and attack an enemy. They could move and pick up a treasure, or the wizard could pick up a treasure and then move, or the wizard could cast a spell and then move, or the wizard could attack and then move. You get the idea. Move and the second action are interchangeable, but that is only if it's just the wizard activating. Okay. Now, the apprentice phase, same thing. Assume that the apprentice is the only miniature on the table. During the apprentice phase, they can move and then act, or they can act and then move, or they can double move. Okay? But now let's throw some miniatures on the table. Let's say that there are 3 thugs near the wizard. They're all within 3 inches of the wizard, and there's another 3 thugs that are 10 inches from the wizard. Okay? 3 within 3 inches and 3 within 10 inches. During the wizard activation phase, there is this bonus that any soldiers, up to 3 soldiers within 3 inches of the wizard, may also activate. This is not called group activation. That's something else that we'll talk about in a second. What this is this is just activation. So, as the player, I have these 3 soldiers, these 3 thugs that are near my wizard. I declare I'm going to do an activation of my wizard, and I'm going to activate 3 soldiers that are within 3 inches. I could activate 2 of them, I could activate 1 of them, but I can only activate a maximum of 3 soldiers. If the apprentice is within 3 inches, I can't do that because the apprentice is its own phase. So what can I do during this time? Well, I can do exactly what I just described if the wizard was by themselves. I can move any of the soldiers first and then do an action with that same soldier. Each of the soldiers and the wizard, when they do their activation, they get to do the 2 actions. They have to do the 2 before the next soldier or apprentice or a wizard gets to move. So in this case, I might choose to move soldier 1 6 inches and then attack. I might move them into combat with an enemy and then attack. When that ends, I take soldier number 2, I move him 6 inches to the same soldier who survived and killed my previous soldier, and I attack. I defeat this thug, and then my 3rd thug, maybe the treasure's nearby, I move him 3 inches, and I pick up the treasure as his action. The wizard still hasn't activated, so the wizard now gets to move and cast a spell. Maybe what I do is I move back to safety, to retreat, and then I cast maybe a wall spell in front of, between my soldier that just picked up the treasure and the enemy so that they can't shoot at him with arrows. That is activation. That is the wizard activation. The soldiers within 3 inches, up to 3 of them, they get a free activation in the wizard activation phase, not the soldier. So those 3 soldiers that I activated during the wizard phase, when it comes to soldier phase, they don't get to take another action. They've already gone. All right? So, if you've heard of this term called group activation, you may be saying, well, Jim, you just described group activation. No, group activation is a little bit different. It's really a strategy. What it is up to 3 soldiers within 3 inches, same condition. All 3 soldiers and up to 3 soldiers and the wizard may first all make their move action. So, thug number 1 moves to the bad guy within 6 inches and stops. Thug number 2 moves 6 inches to the bad guy and stops. Thug number 3, I can move to the treasure that's 3 inches away, or I can move 6 inches to that thug that I've already got 2 thugs ganged up around. I'm going to do that. So I move that thug. So now that enemy thug has 3 of my thugs surrounding him, but my wizard still needs to move. Remember, the move action has to go first. So my wizard moves 6 inches to the treasure, and rather than cast a spell, I don't know why I do this, but rather than cast a spell, I choose, the wizard moves. All the move actions have occurred. Now, all of those that group activated get to do their second action. You can do these in any order. My wizard, who moved last, now picks up the treasure for his second action. He's done. Now I go to the thugs who have surrounded the one single thug. One of them will attack. He's a thug, so he's +2 fight. But according to the rules, he has 2 allies that are surrounding this one enemy. He gets a +2 for each one of them. So he's attacking at +6. Okay? He attacks. He loses. The other thug rolls a 19 or 20 with modifier, 18 with a 2 modifier. And that thug dies. But I've still got 2 thugs surrounding him. So now my second thug takes his second action, He gets +2 to fight, but now he gets the +2 only bonus because we're down 1 thug, remember? Normally I would get a +2 and a +2, but now he's at +4 to fight versus the lone thug. Again, that lone thug wins the fight with an 18, +2 is 20, he kills thug number 2. Now I've got thug number 3 facing down enemy thug, and it's an even fight, +2, +2. He swings, he misses, the enemy thug defeats him, and now I've got an enemy thug approximately 6 inches from my wizard who has picked up a treasure, and that is a whole other story. So here's the thing, group activation, the strategy of group activation is it allows you a chance to move up to 3 soldiers and your wizard if you want to. Their normal move action, they all do their move action first. The move action has to come first. When you group activate a wizard and up to 3 soldiers within 3 inches, the move action has to be first. After all the miniatures have moved, then they all get their second action, and you can do that in any order. So the difference between that and the previous one I described is, in the previous one, the wizard is going to activate, but he just goes, hey, I got 3 soldiers within 3 inches. You guys can get a bonus activation this phase. You get to go too. They can go do what they want, and they do them individually, and they do both actions before the next figure is activated. The wizard can go first and move and then spell, and then the remaining 3 soldiers can move and do their action individually. Move, action, move, action, move, action, or action, move, action, move, action, move. Whereas with group activation, the 3 soldiers and the wizard all perform their move first. And the main reason for doing a group activation is what I just described to you. It allows your soldiers to individually surround an enemy and get that bonus that your allies give you, the +2 per ally bonus. There might be some other reasons for doing a group activation. The one I can think of that I may have used is getting the soldiers moved and performing a shield so that the wizard could do something behind them and not be targeted. But you know, you could almost do that same thing by just doing a move and activate, and then the soldiers do their move and activate individually. The group activation really, at its best, maybe somebody else can come up with an idea of where group activation could be a benefit. But really, the primary reason for it is to allow your soldiers to get around a single enemy and outnumber them and get the bonuses. So that is your activation versus group activation explained. Okay, that's all I've got. I welcome my viewers to submit their own ideas on some basic strategies for people new to the game or people who are considering the game. I ask that you hold back on the super tactical discussions because I think I may do another video on that later. And I just don't think discussions involving specific schools of magic, specific spells, or specific combinations of soldier types. You're getting into the nitty-gritty details of tactics and strategies that are very specific to certain players that I think could overwhelm a novice player. It probably wouldn't be very beneficial to them. But again, I welcome anything that you think I've missed. Maybe I made a mistake, or maybe you disagree with something I've offered as advice. I've played over 100 games. I've played, I don't know how many games of Frostgrave. I've played a lot of Frostgrave, and I don't pretend to be an expert, but I have played enough that I've sort of developed my own way of playing the game, and it modifies, it changes over time as I meet new opponents, or if I find new regulars that I play, I have to change my tactics. But overall, with this video, what I wanted to do was just give my friend James and anybody else who's thinking about playing or started playing and maybe a little overwhelmed, I wanted to give you some things to think about that might help you with your next game, or maybe picking your warband, or thinking about what you want to do when the game starts. You can do that before the game or do it when the game starts. You're just going to be doing it on the fly. The game is, I think it's 10 years old. It came out in 2014, I believe. And I've been playing it ever since. And it just doesn't get old. And with the expansions, Joe keeps releasing expansions for it. The game has really, really continued to grow and grow. And it's it's just fun. I still play it for fun. I don't play it for to make my opponent go home feeling bad about themselves. I want new players to find the game. I want new players to join the game, whether they're here in Atlanta or elsewhere. If this helps them and they enjoy the game, I feel like, you know, I've done some good for the community, because it is one of my favorite games, and I don't intend to stop playing it anytime soon. So if you're new, if you're a novice, if you've never played it and you want to, there's some advice for you. Read the comments. You might find some additional information in there that will help you. And if you have any questions, post them. I'll do my best to answer them. I don't pretend to be the end-all, know-all expert on Frostgrave, but you probably will get some feedback from others in addition to me, and hopefully they'll offer you some good advice as well. All right, that's all I've got. Thanks for joining me. I'll be back next week with an actual combat solo game of Frostgrave. Until then, this is Jim the Tabletop Engineer. Thanks for joining me, and everybody take care.